The Marcos family originally came from Ilocos Norte and established their political dynasty that can be traced to as early as 1925. With the popularity of the Marcoses in the Philippine politics at that time, it was no wonder that on December 13, 1965, Ferdinand Marcos Sr. won the presidential election by a landslide and was inaugurated at Quirino Grandstand, Manila. Marking him as the 10th official president of the country, he held onto that power as hard as he could, running 2 terms during his presidency. During his first term that ranges from 1965 to 1969, Ferdinand Marcos Sr.'s leadership in the Philippines was marked by a mix of ambitious development programs, increasing authoritarianism, and significant corruption. He focused on improving the Philippine military and infrastructure projects. His administration undertook significant public works projects such as building roads, bridges, schools, and hospitals. He often highlighted this initiative as evidence of his commitment to modernizing the country.
First, I want to end poverty and create equality. We envision a new society with the same opportunities with everyone else. One of my programs is to end hunger and drive development. It is important to increase the food production in this country, corruption, and enact justice. Our administrative machinery must be regenerated, gear it to the requirements of national growth. Graft and corruption in our government will be exposed and eliminated. Fourth, deception and promoting the truth. The media have become the weapon of the elite classes. Rather than to serve the public forum, they control the media, alleviate the daily violence in this country. I will institute the advancement of our Philippine military while negotiating critical justice for other countries. In making these promises, I astute you not only identifying the ills in which has long plagued the Philippine societies. I will lay down concrete ambitious plans to save our country. Again, thank you to all the people that voted me.
Some of his administration's notable achievements are successful drive against smuggling, greater production of rice, land reform was given an impetus, and the government finances were stabilized by higher revenue collections. However, his leadership evolved dramatically over time, starting with a period of economic development and modernization, but eventually descending into dictatorship during martial law. His second term in 1969 to 1972, President Marcos was re-elected for an unprecedented second term because of his impressive performance, or, as his critics claim, because of massive vote buying and electoral fraud. The second term proved to be a daunting challenge to the president, an economic crisis brought by external and internal forces, a restive and radicalized studentry demanding reforms in the educational system, rising tide of criminality and subversion by the reorganized communist movement, and secessionism in the South. Because of these events, one of the major opposing figures against the Marcoses, Benigno Aquino Jr., who was a senator at that time and an advocate of democracy, stood against the dictator as he saw this as a betrayal of the Filipino people's rights and freedoms. The Aquino family of Tarlac was also considered as one of the most prominent families in politics, producing several congressmen and senators. Together with other politicians, he led the opposition and investigated numerous crimes that the Marcoses were accused of before, He got arrested and was incarcerated for 7 years. Later on, he found his own political party, Lakas ng Bayan, and ran for the 1978 Philippine parliamentary election, but all the members of his party lost.
My fellow countrymen, I stand before you today not as a member of the opposition, but as a Filipino deeply troubled with events that have come to light. We are at a juncture in our nation's history where the integrity of our government and the sanctity of human life hang in the balance. This heinous crime, the Jabida massacre, is not just a blot on our nation's honor, but a glaring example of the failure of this administration to safeguard the rights and the lives of its citizens. The fact that the government has kept this from public knowledge is a testament to its disregard for transparency and the rule of law. It is time for this government to stop operating in secrecy, stop exploiting the marginalized, and to start acting in the interests of all Filipinos, regardless of religion, ethnicity, or political affiliation. The Filipino people deserve a government that values their rights and lives above all. So I ask you, my colleagues, to join me in the calling for a full investigation into the Jabida massacre. Let us show the Filipino people that we will not stand idly by while their rights are trampled. Let us ensure that justice is served and that this government is held accountable
In
for its
1980,
crimes.
President Marcos and his wife allowed Aquino to travel to the US and get medical treatment, and during this time, he continued to lead the opposing party and as Marcos' biggest critic. When the situation in the Philippines worsened, he then decided to go back to the country to face Marcos himself and restore democracy. However, on August 21, 1983, at Manila International Airport, he was assassinated upon his return. His death galvanized the nation, and the call for change grew louder. In 1985, a quiet but determined housewife named Corazon Aquino, Ninoy's widow, stepped into the political spotlight. In the wake of her husband's murder, Cory Aquino remained a reluctant figure in politics. A devoted mother and housewife, Cory had no ambitions of power. But with the nation calling for change, the pressure for her to step into her husband's shoes grew.
I was never meant to be a politician. But when my husband died, I realized that I could not stand by and watch our people suffer any longer. For 20 long years, Ferdinand Marcos has held our country hostage to his personal ambition. He promised progress, yet our people are poorer than ever. He promised peace, yet he has silenced us with fear. He used his power to enrich himself and his cronies, while millions of Filipinos go hungry. I am not here today as a politician. I am here, but as a Filipino, as a mother, and as a widow who has lost her husband to his regime. I am here to offer you hope. Hope that we can end this dictatorship and to bring back democracy, freedom, and dignity to our nation. The time for fear is over. Marcos may have the guns, the bullets, and the military, but we have something more powerful. We have the will of the people. I stand before you.
Cory's leadership, while opposing Ferdinand Marcos Sr., was defined by her humility, moral integrity, and ability to unite a fragmented opposition. Her journey from being a housewife to becoming the face of democratic movement in the Philippines is one of the most remarkable stories in political history.
says he gave us progress. But where is this progress? When our country is drowning in debt and our streets are filled with protests. I believe in the Filipino people. I believe that we stand together. We can overcome even the darkest day of this dynasty. Ferdinand Marcos may have power today, but he will not have it forever. The people will prevail. Democracy will prevail. This is not just my fight. This is our fight. And I ask you, will you fight with me for a free and democratic Philippines? If I am elected, I will dedicate myself to the restoration of the democracy in our country. I will be your voice, your strength, and together
Cory was
we will
seen as a
rebuild
symbol of
our
moral
nation.
leadership grounded in honesty and simplicity, which stood in stark contrast to the corruption and extravagance of the Marcos regime. Her leadership was rooted in the values of justice, truth, and democracy. She often referred to herself as an ordinary citizen and plain housewife, but her humility resonated with the masses and increases her credibility. In 1985, after 2 years of civil unrest, Marcos called for a snap election. It was a gamble, a way to silence critics and show his control. But the majority of the opposition and anti-Marcos movement urged Cory to run for president against Marcos. The election took place on February 7, 1986, with millions of Filipinos casting their votes hoping for change. But when the results were announced, the regime declared Marcos the winner. The people knew the election had been stolen, but instead of despair, the fraudulent election became the final spark that would lead to the Filipinos' uprising. The EDSA People Power Revolution. The EDSA People Power Revolution in 1986 was a historic event in the Philippines that led to the peaceful overthrow of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. and the restoration of democracy after more than 2 decades of his authoritarian rule. It was a moment of non-violent civil resistance, and it became a global symbol of peaceful revolution. On February 20, 1986, Marcos proclaimed himself victor of the snap elections and was set to retain the presidency. On the same day, Cory Aquino led the People's Victory Rally at Luneta and called for civil disobedience, which included the boycotting of known Marcos crony institutions. Many Filipinos, especially the urban middle class, were fed up with the widespread corruption, economic hardship, and political repression of the Marcos regime.
For several years, many Filipinos have shown fear and threats. Today, the freedom that we continue to strive for will serve as a guide, ensuring that all Filipinos will never back down and continue to fight for our rights as Filipinos. The fight is not over, and we will not falter until democracy is restored to our land.
Cory called for a civil disobedience, further inspired by the masses of demand change. On February 22, 1986, the revolution began in earnest when 2 of Marcos' top military officials, Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile and Vice Chief of Staff General Fidel Ramos, broke away from the regime.
This is Cardinal Sin speaking to the people. I ask you to come to the aid of our 2 friends at Camp
In response to
Aguinaldo.
Cardinal Sin's call,
They are our friends.
on February
They are
22,
people of
1986,
Please come.
the Filipino people took to the streets in what would become one of the most peaceful and powerful revolutions in history. For 4 days, millions gathered at EDSA, braving tanks and soldiers with nothing but prayer, unity, and the belief that their voices could not be silenced. Armed only with rosaries, flowers, food, and prayers, the people created peaceful, protective human shield around the military camps. They blocked tanks and soldiers sent by Marcos to attack the rebels. As the mass protests grew larger and military defections increased, Marcos became increasingly desperate. On February 25, 1986, He was inaugurated as the president in an hastily arranged ceremony at Malacanang Palace despite the overwhelming opposition. On the same day, Quezon Aquino was also sworn in as a president in a separate ceremony at Club Filipino in San Juan. With this, the country had two rival presidents, but Cory was recognized by the people and the international community.
You, mag-ipakit ka na at ang mga bata. Opo, Senyora.
Late in the evening of February 25, 1986, under increasing pressure and after negotiations facilitated by the U.S., Ferdinand Marcos Sr., his family, and close supporters fled to the Philippines. They were airlifted to Hawaii by U.S. military helicopters. As Marcos left, millions of Filipinos celebrated their victory on the streets of Manila. With Marcos out of the country on February 25, 1986, Cory Aquino was sworn in as the 11th President of the Republic of the Philippines. It was a triumph of democracy over dictatorship, of nonviolence over oppression. Cory had become the unlikely leader of a revolution that changed the course of the Philippine history.
If you have to cut off my hands, do so. I will not leave this country. We were never unfaithful to our country, and yet they do this to us.
I was talking to someone.
Those Americans, they betray us.
What?
But for Cory, the work had just begun. As president, she faced the enormous task of rebuilding a fractured nation, restoring democratic institutions,
I have felt
and
no
healing the
loss,
wounds of
but rather
decades-long
peace.
authoritarian rule.
The great work we set out to do, for which the nation may be its single leader and is completed. I held total power in my hands, and even after I had scattered the enemies of democracy, I kept in mind that power and glory are fleeting. The people will not judge us by the greed we profess or the label we wear, for the slogan we shout, but by our work, industry, sacrifice, honesty, and purity of character.
The EDSA People Power revolutions demonstrated that a regime built on fear and repression could be toppled by the collective will of the people without the use of violence, and until today, it stands as one of the most important moments in the Philippine struggle for democracy.